John and Ken Show. John Cobell and Ken Shampoo. It's KFI AM 640.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome. A reminder, the Moist Line comes back in 2 days. 1-8185-MOIST-9 is that number. Not a toll-free number. 818-1-818-566-4789. Well, we did this story, I don't know when. It might have been a couple of years ago, because this is obviously a big deal about what to do with 3.6 million pounds of nuclear waste. We're talking about the now closed San Onofre nuclear power plant down there on the 5 freeway as you head south of San Clemente.
Yeah, it's
You're probably familiar with it.
It looks like 2 enormous breasts sticking in the air.
Oh, that's right. That is the impression you get.
Oh, one of my teenage sons, we were driving down to San Diego one day, and he looked over and he saw that, and he just started laughing hysterically. That's when you know puberty's hit.
Yeah, no.
When you look at San Onofre and you start giggling.
They have not produced any electricity out of that plant in several years, but SoCal Edison was trying to come up with what to do with the byproduct of that plant, which is, how else to put it, nuclear waste.
Nuclear waste. And so now there's been some kind of settlement with an activist group named Citizens Oversight, and it looks like that SoCal Edison is going to get a 20-year permit to bury the nuclear waste near the beach at San Onofre.
And allegedly in heavy, dry casks. Not like they just take a shovel and throw the nuclear waste into the sand. But
I don't understand this.
It is an odd, thing to do.
Let's get Charles Langley on. He's executive director for the group called Public Watchdogs. And they were not part of the settlement and don't like this settlement. Yeah, Charles, what does your group do, Public Watchdogs? I guess it's self-explanatory in the title, but why don't you explain?
Well, we're dedicated to the premise that the public has the right to know. And we're very disturbed about what's happened at San Onofre because everything has been done in a cloak of secrecy. And I just wanted to clarify something you said. And one of the things about safety with nuclear waste is people want to put it in dry casks because it's the safest technology we know of. That's not what is happening on the beach at San Onofre State Beach Park. What they're doing is they're putting them in thin-walled canisters, and these are very large, fragile canisters with a stainless steel wall that's 5/8 of an inch thick. The canisters are about 5 or 6 feet across and about 20 feet high, and each one holds up to 500,000 pounds of deadly radioactive nuclear waste that's toxic to all human life for millions of years. And the reason this issue is so important to your listeners, especially those who are driving by on the I-5, is that the slightest hairline fracture in one of these canisters could release millions of curies of radiation, and 1 curie is enough to kill you. Each canister, in fact, contains the same amount of radiation that was released at Chernobyl, and 75 of these canisters are going to be buried 108 feet from the beach.
How did we get here? Because I think a lot of listeners right now don't even understand why anyone would want to do this, bury this at the beach.
Because it's cheap and convenient for Southern California Edison, which owns the nuclear waste. And what they did was they went to the California Coastal Commission, whose mission statement is to protect the California coastline for future generations. And they got a permit to bury the waste on the beach for 20 years. So a local law firm here in San Diego decided to sue them. They named Citizens Oversight as the plaintiff. They went to court, and they had a really good chance of preventing this permit from being issued, but then what they did was they settled out of court. And the bottom line on the court settlement is that while Southern California Edison is claiming that it's going to make a commitment to look at possible other locations, the burial is going to take place on January 1st, just as was planned under the original permit agreement. And there's going to be very little, really nothing's happened, and yet they're claiming victory. They're claiming that they've found a solution for moving the waste.
Well, I see. That's what I don't understand, because it looks like SoCal Edison only committed to make commercially reasonable efforts to relocate the spent fuel, and I guess they have 20 years to do this.
They do.
Well,
they do, and Yeah, by the way, this isn't, they call it cold and dark storage. It's not cold and dark. When these things come out of the spent fuel pool, they can be up to 750 degrees hot when they put them in the ground, which if it's hot enough to burn all the hair off your body, to just vaporize it if you get too close to these things. I mean, this is incredible. This is the world's most dangerous, most toxic substance.
How close is it to the state beach there? Is this going to be? I try to figure out exactly where on these grounds.
Oh, okay, it's 108 feet from the beach, which would be the high water mark. And it's divided from the beach by a crumbling 15-foot seawall, which they are not allowed to repair under California law.
Well, now, you're not being alarmist about this. This really is.
Wait. So you have the beach, and then you have the seawall, and then you have the waste? Inland, the waste?
Yeah. So, a guy with a stepladder could hop over that seawall and be walking on top of this spent fuel storage installation.
Will there be signage? Will there be signage or anything? Or
well, there might be. There's no signage out there now. I videotaped the nuclear waste dump, about a month ago, and I could tell you I could just get in there with a pair of bulb cutters in probably 2 or 3 minutes, and I'm not exactly an athletic guy.
How does the public use that beach very much?
San Onofre State Beach is one of the #1 surfing spots in the world. This is one of the most primo pieces of California real estate. And the big danger is one, it's readily accessible to terrorists. 2, it's going to be guarded by a rent-a-cop, and 2 full-time employees, a manager and their assistant. That's it. That's staffing there.
This sounds comical. This sounds like the premise for
a satire.
A satire movie. You got a rent-a-cop guarding an enormous amount of
dangerous
nuclear waste, and he can get through the bolt
Not only that, they've waived the requirements for drug testing because the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has deemed that this location is safe. But it gets even more absurdly, hysterically comical. There's an earthquake fault running directly under Unit 2 at San Onofre. That's the second boob. It's in a tsunami zone. If these things get covered with water, the passive air cooling system, because they're hot, remember I told you they're hot,
can
get filled up with water, and then they can heat up. Now what happens if they heat up is you could get a crack in one of these thin-walled canisters, and the inert helium gas inside would leak out. In that case, there'd be hydrogen off-gassing and incredible heat inside the container building up. It's called adiabatic heat buildup, in which case you'd have a hydrogen explosion, which would collapse the fuel rod assemblies inside and create essentially a meltdown. Now, what's so terrifying about this is you've got 75 of these giant containers, each one with more nuclear radiation in it than was released at Chernobyl, all lined up like little eggs in an egg carton. So there's a potential for a chain reaction of one meltdown after another going up and down the facility.
And can you hang on, Charles, because we got a lot of other questions to ask you about this.
Sure.
We're talking to Charles Langley.
Hard to believe.
Executive director of an organization called Public Watchdogs out of San Diego. They were not involved in apparently this settlement between another activist group that he described, like a collection of lawyers. Anyway, this is about what to do with 3.6 million pounds of nuclear waste, which came out of the San Onofre nuclear power plant, which is long closed, but they have to figure out how to dispose of it. And apparently the plan, as it has been for a while, is to bury it at the beach in these containers that you heard our guests say may not hold up. They can do it for 20 years, apparently.
SoCal Edison can do it for 20 years, and they were sued by some activist group, Citizens Oversight, and by the time they got to the settlement, nothing really changed. They're still going to bury it in the same place that they planned. They have a 20-year permit, and the only accommodation they made, it's like, well, we'll look for other places over the next 20 years, see what happens. That's it. And it's in a tsunami zone. It's near an earthquake fault. There's not going to be much security around it. It's near a state. This is just hard to meet. Hard
It's
to
bizarre.
believe. John and Ken Show, KFI. Deborah Marquez News. John and Ken Show, John Cobelt and Ken Shampoo. It's KFI AM 640.
All right, well, we're talking about this curious settlement between SoCal Edison and some sort of activist group to allow SoCal Edison to bury nuclear waste at the beach at San Onofre. It's very bizarre. They're going to get to do it for a 20-year period so they can figure something else out. We have a guest who was not involved. It's another watchdog group, not involved in the case, but certainly watching it. Charles Langley, Executive Director of Public Watchdog, is on with us.
Charles, I'm quite confused by this. I don't understand how you could have a settlement between a private company, SoCal Edison, and I understand that they own the nuclear waste, and some, cockamamie activist group. How they get to set the terms here. Isn't this something that the federal government, the state government would be overseeing? Because the kind of
like the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
Yes, exactly. Why is this the call of a for-profit company who's obviously going to do it the cheapest way possible, and an activist group? I don't even know what their standing is exactly. Why isn't this obviously being determined at the highest levels of the federal government?
Well, the lawsuit was against the Coastal Commission for issuing the permit, which it never should have issued. It totally violates their mission statement. And the attorneys for this legal action needed a plaintiff, and they found one in this organization.
Okay, but the Coastal Commission gives homeowners in Malibu a hard time if they build a deck attached to their home.
You can't even plant roses near the coast.
I know. I've read so many stories. So they're incredibly invasive in people's lives in Malibu. Why would they allow 3.5 million pounds of nuclear waste to be buried almost on a beach? Why would they do that?
They rubber stamped a permit allowing them to do that, and it's a renewable permit. It's renewable.
Yeah,
forever,
I know, but what would be
basically.
the motivation? Like, why wouldn't that be laughed off immediately? It's like, you got to be crazy. You're not burying 3.5 million pounds of nuclear waste on the beach. Get out of here. They should have been thrown out immediately.
The coastal commissioners were lobbied in advance, secretly by Edison. They held a 1.5-hour public hearing. The public wasn't allowed to speak, really, because Edison actually sent out a press release saying that it was a unanimous vote in favor of the permit an hour and a half before the permit was issued. So the fix was in. They wanted that waste on the beach because it was good for Edison and it was good for the political powers that be in the state of California.
Yeah,
it's not good for the people.
Yeah, I know,
think about it.
I thought,
even if nothing ever happens, it's still disturbing.
Well, there's a risk there. You know what we went through here in Los Angeles at Porter Ranch, where SoCal Gas had these ancient, crumbling natural gas wells, and one of them started leaking, and it turns out they hadn't replaced the safety valve in 36 years, and suddenly you had gigantic amounts of methane billowing into the air and poisoning thousands of people. They had to clear out the neighborhood for months. I could see that happening with SoCal Edison. It turns out that one of the casks wasn't quite right. The valve wasn't wasn't tight enough, and then the thing blows.
Well, this is the problem with utility regulation in general. What we've got are regulatory agencies that have been captured. That's the actual legal term. And a captured agency means that it's basically being run by the utilities it is supposed to regulate. And the utilities apparently exercised complete control over the California Coastal Commission. They knew it would be a unanimous vote before the vote even occurred. And the same thing happened.
Well, was there a bribe involved?
At San Alejo.
Because when
Bruno.
You use the word lobbying. When I hear the word lobbying, my brain translates it as somebody wrote a big check. Somebody wrote a bribe.
Well, I don't have evidence of that, but it was very improper. It really smelled. It stinks like a Bolivian fish barrel. The way this whole thing went down.
What can your group do? What can anyone do to stop this from happening? Anything?
Well, I am so glad you asked, because the number one thing people can do is first be aware. This is a very deadly situation. This settlement will not remove the waste from the beach. It keeps the waste on the beach. And I guarantee you, everyone listening to this show, if we allow this waste to be buried, we will be dead before it is ever removed. In fact, it's very likely that our children will be dead before it's ever removed. And we believe that the possibility of a nuclear accident at San Onofre is inevitable, unavoidable.
Are there neighborhoods nearby?
Well, of course. There's San Clemente.
Like how close are residents?
San Juan Capistrano. There's 8.5 million people who live within the 50-mile plume radius that's identified by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. In fact, there's a physicist named Paul Frey who did an analysis and said that this one facility, if it's reached by a tsunami or an earthquake, could release enough radiation to be 40 times worse than Chernobyl, and it could taint the entire West Coast and inland as far as 900 to 1,000 miles. And that's a conservative estimate.
I just don't understand why this didn't get a huge public hearing and why the federal government isn't involved. I'm completely baffled.
The Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the federal agency that regulates this stuff, says it's safe. And they're kowtowing to the industry. They do whatever the industry asks. And our state leaders and state government are doing whatever the industry asks. And the only way we're going to be able to fight this is to get on the phone and call our elected officials at every level and say, this is unacceptable. And what I'd like to suggest people do is spend 15 minutes on our website at publicwatchdogs.org and just get a feel for how horrible this is. We've got great information on there and a petition people can sign that we're going to submit to the Coastal Commission and the governor. But what we need is massive public outrage. Without that, nothing's going to happen because most people don't know how incredibly dangerous this situation is.
All right, Charles, thanks for joining us. Public Watchdogs, we appreciate it. All right, more coming up.
John and Ken, KFI, Deborah Marquez News.
Too much sex.
Everybody, wash your hands. Cover your mouth when you cough. If you are sick, stay home.
Die quickly.
And now, an update from the John and Ken Health and Science Desk. Here's John and Ken.
Very good. John and Ken Show, John Cobell, Ken Shampoo, KFI, AM 640.
It is the Health and Science Desk Special Edition. Hurricane Harvey. What do you think we're going to delve into this time? Climate change! What we have first is apparently a montage of assorted talking heads from media outlets including CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post, and here they go blaming Hurricane Harvey on, you guessed it, climate change.
Is there a why to this? Why there is so much water associated with this storm? One of the things we've heard from scientists over the last 10 years is that climate change does impact the intensity of many of the storms that we see.
I probably wouldn't attribute what we're looking at here. This is not an uncommon occurrence.
Could climate change be fueling the history-making nature of this storm?
Well, certainly climate change, a warmer climate is now flavoring all weather, Thomas. This storm would have formed regardless.
In Houston, are you saying that this isn't just a Houston issue, this is a climate change issue?
It's exactly the type of thing that the experts on climate have been predicting. Our normal distribution of storms is changing and will be skewing to more severe events.
We've had now 3 storms in 12 years that were as bad as this, and climate change is actually this is the kind of flooding you would predict based on the climate change model. So that's another debate for the weeks ahead.
Rolling back an Obama-era regulation which required all government construction to take into account the flood risk which was being caused and the future flood risk being caused by climate change and rising ocean temperatures and sea levels. The timing now seems almost
infected hemorrhoids.
Not simply a storm like this once a year, but storms like these that are just consistently coming. And so,
Okay. All right.
No? We still have another 2 minutes.
No.
It took a few days.
Here they come.
And it's a bit surprising considering when we went through this back in, 2004 with Al Gore warning about how these severe storms are going to strike like every year. All we had was 2005 Katrina. It's been 12 years.
The media hoaxsters...
since we've had anything of this kind of magnitude.
Media hoaxsters spent 8 months hyping a non-existent Russia story. So now it's on to climate change causing Hurricane Harvey. What you just said, it's been 12 years. Now, in 2005, we could have put together probably 6 hours worth of clips of all these hoaxsters claiming that, well, this is going to be the new normal. We are going to get very severe Katrina-like storms now every year, many times a year. This is what it's going to be like. There's going to be quite a few storms who are going to be crashing in Category 5. There's going to be a lot of death and destruction and hundreds of billions. That's what they were all saying. And then 2006 came, and there was no major hurricanes that hit landfall. 2007, nothing. 2008, nothing. 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016. 12 stinking years, there wasn't one, not one major hurricane that made landfall, which was a record since they've been keeping track of these things.
Roger Pielke Jr. is a professor at the University of Colorado Center for Science and Technology. He pointed out that there have been 14 U.S. landfalls of Category 4 or greater hurricanes, Category 5 is the highest, from 1926 to 1969, but only 4 from 1970 to 2017.
That's really important here. That's extremely important. 1926 to 1969.
14.
1970 to 2017, only 4. There have been far, far, far fewer major hurricanes hitting the U.S. over the last 47 years.
During Obama's reign, there were just 4 hurricanes of any size that made landfall. That's an average of 0.5 per year, the fewest of any presidential administration dating back to 1901.
You also measure the strength of hurricane in part by its low pressure. And Harvey is only tied for 14th among strongest U.S. hurricanes since 1851. There were, along with storms from 1989 and 1954. So periodically you get these. It was strong, but far from the strongest.
Roy Spencer is principal research scientist at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. He says he's plotted sea surface temperatures of all major Category 3 strikes in Texas since 1870 and found that major hurricanes don't really care whether the Gulf is above average or below average in temperature. How about that?
The problem here is that the storm stalled. The storm was blocked by a high-pressure system over the west. It's the same high-pressure system that's been pumping all this obnoxious heat to us, and at the same time, it acted as a barrier to the hurricane. It couldn't move. There was no jet stream to carry it to the north or east. There was no upper-level wind movement. So it stalled out. It happens every once in a while. Years ago, I went to Florida, where my in-laws used to live, on the west coast of Florida, and there was a hurricane or a tropical storm named Barry, and it parked out over the Gulf, and for 4 days, it rained heavily. It wasn't catastrophic flooding or wind. It just kept raining and raining and raining because the storm stalled. And I remember going to New Jersey on a vacation years ago to the beach. The entire week, we were stuck in the house. Storm stalled. It rained and rained, it rained and rained. That's just what storms do. If it doesn't have the upper level wind to push it along, they get stuck. So what?
Spencer said there is no aspect of global warming theory that says rain systems are going to be moving slower, as we're seeing in Texas. This was just the luck of the draw. There you go.
Roy Spencer also said global warming had nothing to do with the stalling. The jet stream is just well to the north.
He just said it's a rare combination of events.
Yeah. There is such a dramatic lack of understanding of how complicated the climate is. And you have these hoaxsters. This is very much like religion. If I had to put a gun to your head, you would probably admit we don't know what's going to happen to us after we die. We don't know. Because we don't. We know what we've been taught, but we don't know. But there's plenty of hoaxsters who run around saying, I have the answer. I talked to God. I got a book. Here's what's going to happen. Here's what you should do. Give me money. The same thing now with this climate thing. We don't understand the climate. Largely. We don't. That creates a vacuum where the hoaxsters can run in and say, well, I know. Because then those hoaxsters get attention. They get money. They get to sell products. They get to sell films. They get speaking engagements. They get grants for research. So, of course, they know. And, hey, look what I figured out. Do it my way. Gives them power. Gives them control.
All right.
They're like religious preachers.
When we come back, justice. 3 years later for a big John and Ken story.
John and Ken, KFI, Deborah Marquez News. John and Ken Show. John Cobelt and Ken Shampoo. It's KFI AM 640.
Yeah, you're not kidding. All right, coming up at 5 o'clock. Oh, not again. You know that Santa Ana riverbed? Now the problem with homeless encampments extends down to Fountain Valley. We've talked a lot about Anaheim. Last week I had some guests on. We're going to talk to a woman that's experiencing this problem. They're just saying they're not getting any help from local politicians. We'll get into that with a guest after the news at 5 o'clock. The John and Ken Show several years back covered a story involving the Centinela Valley Union High School District. Who remembers that?
I do.
This
was in Englewood, Hawthorne?
That's right. Lenox, that area down there, pretty close to the South Bay or in the South Bay. Anyway, they had a school superintendent by the name of Jose Fernandez, who eventually was let go from his job. And the reason we covered the story is that we could not believe his salary and benefit package, $663,000 plus. He also had a home loan of $910,000 with an interest rate of 2%. He had a $750,000 life insurance policy obtained before the school board could approve it. He was unbelievably well compensated. We spent a lot of time on this story. In fact, we took the show down there.
Yeah, we did.
When angry residents showed up to attend one of these school board meetings.
The Daily Breeze, local paper, broke the story. Won a Pulitzer Prize for it.
They did, you're right. And they won a Pulitzer Prize in 2015.
And one of the things I remember we were always shouting, isn't this a crime? Shouldn't he be prosecuted?
Well, that's the news today. Jose Fernandez was booked on corruption charges by the Los Angeles County DA's office. In fact, we have their press release. 6 counts of conflict of interest, 3 counts of misappropriation of public funds, 2 counts of grand theft, and 1 count of embezzlement with excessive taking allegations.
That's a crime, excessive taking?
Excessive taking. That's not like looting, is it?
Excessive taker.
Looting.
No, it's not looting.
This is the Public Integrity Division of the L.A. County DA's office.
Wow.
That announced this case today, and he was actually booked. He's supposed to be arraigned tomorrow.
Took 3.5 years.
Unlawfully creating supplemental retirement programs for school district executives, including himself. In 2012, he allegedly made last-minute changes to a retirement plan that allowed him to spike his salary to gain lucrative retirement benefits. In 2013, his wages for purposes of the retirement plan totaled more than $750,000, nearly $500,000 more than the next highest paid employee in the school district. Like we said, he took this job to enrich himself. And he did quite a job over the years making sure of that.
He made aggressive decisions to enrich himself. I mean, he manipulated the system and he changed the rules, and it took him 3.5 years to put this all together. He could get 15 years in state prison.
I hope so. And remember, he had this dummy school board just doing his bidding. Remember that?
Oh, I remember that, yeah.
I think a number of them got replaced after this. I can't remember their names.
I remember we went inside to one of the meetings.
Oh, yeah, the crowd was really angry. They couldn't believe this.
This was horrible.
And a lot of people were like, we're kind of a smaller school district, and it's an area that people don't pay attention to, and nobody paid attention to this guy.
He was a cold-eyed sociopath.
No kidding. 57 years old. He was booked into county jail just before 9 a.m. today. And tomorrow, as I mentioned, he actually will face the arraignment on the charges.
Yeah. The Daily Breeze called up his wife. Well, they called his cell phone. She answered. And she hung up on
No comment, right.
Yeah, well, your lifestyle's about to change drastically once your husband ends up in prison for 15
This
years.
proves, and I think the listeners turned us on to this, we know what we're doing here. We could smell corruption. Something wasn't right.
Yeah. You can just look at a guy's face. Look at his face. That's a corrupt face.
Now, that doesn't mean he'll be convicted. Sometimes these cases ended up in a broken road. And of course, if he still has money to find a good attorney.
Yeah, I know. That's the irony. He's going to use the tax money he stole to defend himself and get some blowhard liar attorney.
All right. When we come back, more and more, of course, residents all over Southern California are upset over homeless encampments in their neighborhood, close to their homes. The latest is once again the Santa Ana riverbed. That's not even a trail, this part, I don't think. Fountain Valley is where we're going to hear the complaints. We'll have a guest on next affected by this.
John and Ken Show. Deborah Mark has the news. KFI AM 640.